He would say, "Hey, Chad."
Most of each day in bed and the rest of it in a wheelchair. It was rumored that she kept a CSA pistol concealed among her numerous shawls and wraps. Jem and I hated her. If she was on the porch when we passed, we would be raked by her wrathful gaze, subjected to ruthless interrogation regarding our behavior, and given a melancholy prediction on what we would amount to when we grew up, which was always nothing. We had long ago given up the idea of walking past her house on the opposite side of the street, but only made her raise her voice and let the whole neighborhood in on it. We could do nothing to please her, if I said as sunnily as I could, "Hey, Mrs. Dubose," I would receive for an answer, "Don't you say hey to me, you ugly girl. You say good afternoon, Mrs. Dubose." She was vicious. Once she heard Jem refer to our father as Atticus, and her reaction was apoplectic. Besides being the sassiest, most disrespectful mutts who ever passed her way, we were told that it was quite a pity our father had not remarried after our mother's death. A lovelier lady than our mother never lived, she said, and it was heartbreaking the way Atticus Finch let her children run wild. I did not remember our mother, but Jem did. He would tell me about her sometimes, and he went livid when Mrs. Dubose shot us this message. Jem, having survived Boo Radley, a mad dog, and other terrors, had concluded that it was cowardly to stop at Miss Rachel's front steps and wait, and had decreed that we must run as far as the post office corner each evening to meet Atticus coming from work. Countless evenings Atticus would find Jem furious at something Mrs. Dubose had said when we went by. "Easy does it, son," Atticus would say. "She's an old lady and she's ill. You just hold your head high and be a gentleman. Whatever she says to you, it's your job not to let her make you mad." Jem would say she must not very sick. She hollered so. When the three of us came to her house, Atticus would sweep off his hat, wave gallantly to her and say, "Good evening, Mrs. DuBose. You look like a picture this evening." I never heard Atticus say like a picture of what. He would tell her the courthouse news, and would say he hoped with all his heart she'd have a good day tomorrow. He would return his hat to his head, swing me to his shoulders in her very presence, and we would go home in the twilight. It was times like these when I thought my father, who hated guns and had never been to any wars, was the bravest man who ever lived. The day after Jem's 12th birthday, his money was burning up his pockets, so we headed for town in the early afternoon. Jem thought he had enough to buy a miniature steam engine for himself and a twirling baton for me. I had long had my eye on that baton. It was at VJ Elmore's. It was bedecked with sequins and tinsel. It cost 17 cents. It was then my burning ambition to grow up and twirl with the Macomb County High School band. Having developed my talent to where I could throw up a stick and almost catch it coming down, I had caused Calpurnia to deny me entrance to the house every time she saw me with a stick in my hand. I felt that I could overcome this defect with a real baton, and I thought it generous of Jem to buy one for me. Mrs. DuBose was stationed on her porch when we went by. "Where are you two going at this time of day?" she shouted. "Playing hooky, I suppose. I'll just call up the principal and tell him." She put her hands on the wheels of her chair and executed a perfect right face. "Oh, it's Saturday, Mrs. DuBose," said Jem. "Makes no difference if it's Saturday," she said obscurely. "I wonder if your father knows where you are. Mrs. DuBose, we've been going to town by ourselves since we were this high." Jem placed his hand palm down about 2 feet above the sidewalk. "Don't you lie to me," he yelled. "Jeremy Finch, Maudie Atkinson, told me you broke down a Scuppernong Arbor this morning. She's going to tell your father, and then you'll wish you never saw the light of day. If you aren't sent to the reform school before next week, my name's not DuBose." Jem, who hadn't been near Miss Maudie's Scuppernong Arbor since last summer, and who knew Miss Maudie wouldn't tell Atticus if he had, issued a general denial. "Don't you contradict me," Mrs. DuBose bawled. "And you," she pointed an arthritic finger at me, "what are you doing in those overalls? You should be in a dress and camisole, young lady. You'll grow up waiting on tables if somebody doesn't change your way." A Finch waiting on tables at the OK Cafe. Ha! I was terrified. The OK Cafe was a dim organization on the north side of the square. I grabbed Jem's hand, but he shook me loose. "Come on, Scout," he whispered. "Don't pay any attention to her. Just hold your head high and be a gentleman." But Mrs. DuBose held us. Not only a Finch waiting on tables, but one in the courthouse lawing for niggers. Jem stiffened. Mrs. DuBose's shot had gone. And she knew it. Yes, indeed. What has this world come to when a Finch goes against his razor? I'll tell you. She put her hand to her mouth.
When she drew it away, it trailed a long silver thread of saliva. Your father's no better than the niggers and trash he works for. Jem was scarlet. I pulled at his sleeve, and we were followed up the sidewalk by a Philippic on our family's moral degeneration, the major premise of which was that half the Finches were in the asylum anyway. But if our mother were living, we would not have come to such a state. I wasn't sure what Jem resented most, but I took umbrage at Mrs. DeBose's assessment of the family's mental hygiene.
I had become almost accustomed to hearing insults aimed at Atticus, but this was the first one coming from an adult. Except for her remarks about Atticus, Mrs. DuBose's attack was only routine. There was a hint of summer in the air. In the shadows it was cool, but the sun was warm, which meant good times coming. No school and Dill. Jem bought his steam engine, and we went by Elmore's for my baton. Jem took no pleasure in his acquisition. He jammed it in his pocket and walked silently beside me toward home. On the way home, I nearly hit Mr. Linkdees, who said, "Look out now, Scout," when I missed the toss. And when we approached Mrs. DuBose's house, my baton was grimy from having picked it up out of the dirt. So many times. She was not on the porch. In later years, I sometimes wondered exactly what made Jem do it. What made him break the bonds of "you just be a gentleman's son" and the phase of self-conscious rectitude he had recently entered. Jem had probably stood as much guff about Atticus loring for niggers as had I, and I took it for granted that he kept his temper. He had a naturally tranquil disposition and a slow fuse. At the time, however, I thought the only explanation for what he did was that for a few minutes he simply went mad. What Jem did was something I'd do as a matter of course had I not been under Atticus's interdict, which I assumed included not fighting horrible old ladies. We had just come to her gate when Jem snatched my baton and ran flailing wildly up the steps into Mrs. DuBose's front yard, forgetting everything Atticus had said, forgetting that she packed a pistol under her shawls, forgetting that if Mrs. DuBose missed, her girl Jessie probably wouldn't. He did not begin to calm down until he had cut the tops off every camellia bush Mrs. DuBose owned, until the ground was littered with green buds and leaves. He bent my baton against his knee, snapped it in two, and threw it down. By that time, I was shrieking. Jem yanked my hair, said he didn't care. He'd do it again if he got a chance. And if I didn't shut up, he'd pull up his hair out of my head. I didn't shut up, and he picked me. I lost my balance and fell on my face. Jem picked me up roughly, took me a plug to the soul. There was nothing to say. He did not choose to leave Atticus coming home that evening. We scoped around the kitchen until Calpurnia threw us out. By some voodoo system, Calpurnia seemed to know all about it. She was a less than satisfactory source of palliation, but she did give Jem a hot biscuit and butter, which he tore in half and shared with me. It tasted like coffee. We went to the living room. I picked up a football magazine, found a picture of Dixie Howell, showed it to Jem and said, "This looks like you." That was the nicest thing I could think to say to him, but it was no help. He sat by the windows, hunched down in a rocking chair, scowling, waiting. Daylight faded. 2 geological ages later, we heard the soles of Atticus's shoes scrape the front steps. The screen door slammed. There was a pause. Atticus was at the hat rack in the hall, and we heard him call, "Jem!" His voice was like the winter wind. Atticus switched on the ceiling light in the living room and found us there, frozen still. He carried my baton in one hand. Its filthy yellow tassel trailed on the rug. He held out his other hand. It contained fat camellia buds. "Jem," he said, "are you responsible for this?" "Yes, sir." "Why'd you do it?" Jem said softly. "She said you lured for niggers and trash." "You did this because she said that?" Jem's lips moved, but his
Yes, sir, was inaudible. Son, I have no doubt that you've been annoyed by your contemporaries about me lowering from niggers, as you say, but to do something like this to a sick old lady is inexcusable. I strongly advise you to go down and have a talk with Mrs. Dubose, said Atticus. Come straight home afterward. Jem did not move. Go on, I said. I followed Jem out of the living room. Come back here, Atticus said to me. I came back. Atticus picked up the mobile press and sat down in the rocking chair Jem had vacated. For the life of me, I did not understand how he could sit there in cold blood and read a newspaper when his only son stood an excellent chance of being murdered with a Confederate Army relic.
Of course, Jem antagonized me sometimes until I could kill him, but when it came down to it, he was all I had. Atticus did not seem to realize this, or if he did, he didn't care.
Offer accepted. We'll add it to your route.
I hated him for that. But when you are in trouble, you become easily tired. Soon, I was hiding in his lap, and his arms were around me. "You're mighty big to be rocked," he said. "You don't care what happens to him," I said. "You just send him on to get shot at when all he was doing was standing up for you." Atticus pushed my head under his chin. "It's not time to worry yet," he said. "I never thought Jem'd be the one to lose his head over this. Thought I'd have more trouble with you." I said I didn't see why we had to keep our heads anyway, that nobody I knew at school had to keep his head about anything. "Scout," said Atticus, "when summer comes, you'll have to keep your head about far worse things. It's not fair for you and Jem, I know that, but sometimes we have to make the best of things, and the way we conduct ourselves when the chips are down, well, all I can say is, when you and Jem are grown, maybe you'll look back on this with some compassion and some feeling that I didn't let you down. This case, Tom Robinson's case, is something that goes to the essence of a man's conscience. Scout, I couldn't go to church and worship God if I didn't try to help that man. Atticus, you must be wrong. How's that? Well, most folks seem to think they're right, and you're wrong. They're certainly entitled to think that, and they're entitled to full respect for their opinions, said Atticus. But before I can live with other folks, I've got with myself. The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience. When Jem returned, he found me still in Atticus's lap. Well, son, said Atticus. He set me on my feet, and I made a secret reconnaissance of Jem. He seemed to be all in one piece, but he had a queer look on his face. Perhaps she'd given him a dose of calomel. I cleaned it up for her and said I was sorry, but I ain't, and that I'd work on him every Saturday and try to make him grow back out. There was no point in saying you were sorry if you aren't, said Atticus. Jem, she's old and ill. You can't hold her responsible for what she says and does. Of course, I'd rather she'd have said it to me than to either of you, but we can't always have our druthers. Jem seemed fascinated by a rose in the carpet. Atticus, she said. She wants me to read to her. Read to her? Yes, sir. She wants me to come every afternoon after school and Saturdays and read to her out loud for 2 hours. Atticus, do I have to? Certainly. But she wants me to do it for a month. Then you'll do it for a month. Jem planted his big toe delicately in the center of the rose and pressed it in. Finally, he said, Atticus, it's all right on the sidewalk, but inside it's all dark and creepy. There's shadows and things on the ceiling. Atticus smiled grimly. That should appeal to your imagination. Just pretend you're inside the Radley house. The following Monday afternoon, Jem and I climbed the steep front steps to Mrs. Dubos's house and padded down the open hallway. Jem, armed with Ivanhoe and full of superior knowledge, knocked at the second door on the left. Mrs. Dubose? He called. Jessie opened the wood door and unlatched the screen door. Is that you, Jem Finch? She said. You got your sister with you? I don't know. Let 'em both in, Jessie, said Mrs. Dubose. Jessie admitted us and went off to the kitchen. An oppressive odor met us when we crossed the threshold, an odor I had met many times in rain-rotted grey houses where there are coal oil lamps, water dippers, and unbleached domestic sheets. It always made me afraid, expectant, watchful. In the corner of the room was a brass bed, and in the bed was Mrs. Dubose. I wondered if Jem's activities had put her there, and for a moment I felt sorry for her. She was lying under a pile of quilts, and looked almost friendly. There was a marble-topped washstand by her bed. On it were a glass with a teaspoon in it, a red ear syringe, a box of absorbent cotton, and a steel alarm clock standing on 3 tiny legs. So you brought that dirty little sister of yours, did you? Was her greeting. Jem said quietly, My sister ain't dirty, and I ain't scared of you, although I noticed his knees shaking. I was expecting a tirade, but all she said was, You may commence reading, Jeremy. Jem sat down in a cane-bottomed chair and opened Ivanhoe. I pulled up another one and sat beside him. Come closer, said Mrs. Dubose. Come to the side of the bed. We moved our chairs forward. This was the nearest I had ever been to her, and the thing I wanted most to do was move my chair back again. She was horrible. Her face was the color of a dirty pillowcase, and the corners of her mouth glistened with wet, which inched like a glacier down the deep grooves enclosing her chin. Old-age liver spots dotted her cheeks, and her pale eyes had black pinpoint pupils. Her hands were knobby, and the cuticles were grown up over her fingernails. Her bottom plate was not in, and her upper lip protruded. From time to time she would draw her nether...
Morning.
Yeah, I've got a DoorDash pickup.
Last window, okay.
All right, thank you. Madison. Thanks a lot, man. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Have a good night.
her upper plate and carry her chin with it. This made the wet move faster. I didn't look any more than I had to. Jem reopened Ivanhoe and began reading. I tried to keep up with him, but he read too fast. When Jem came to a word he didn't know, he skipped it, but Mrs. Dubose would catch him and make him spell it out. Jem read for perhaps 20 minutes, during which time I looked at the soot-stained mantelpiece, out the window, anywhere to keep from looking at.
Yeah, hello? Yeah, hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I just picked up an order. Can I get a couple of sweet and sour sauce?
Alright.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, man. Thank you.
As he read along, I noticed that Mrs. Dubose's corrections grew fewer and farther between, that Jem had even left one sentence dangling in mid-air. She was not listening. I looked toward the bed. Something had happened to her. She lay on her back, with the quilts up to her chin. Only her head and shoulders were visible. Her head moved slowly from side to side. From time to time she would open her mouth wide, and I could see her tongue undulate faintly. Cords of saliva collect on her lips. She would draw them in, then open them up again. Her mouth seemed to have a private existence of its own. It went separate and apart from the rest of her, out and in, like a clam hole at low tide. Occasionally it would say, "Patar," like some viscous substance coming to a boil. I pulled Jem's sleeve. He looked at me, then at the bed. Her head made its regular sweep toward us, and Jem said, "Mrs. Dubose, are you all right?" She did not hear him. The alarm clock went off and scared us stiff. A minute later, nerves still tingling, Jem and I were on the sidewalk headed for home. We did not run away. Jessie sent us. Before the clock wound down, she was in the room pushing Jem and me out of it. "Shoo," she said. "You all go home." Jem hesitated at the door. "It's time for her med," Jessie said. As the door swung shut behind us, I saw Jessie walking quickly toward Mrs. Dubose's bed. It was only 3:45 when we got home, so Jen and I dropped people in the backyard until it was time to meet Atticus. Atticus had 2 yellow pencils for me and a football magazine for Jen, which I suppose was a silent reward for our first day's session with Mrs. Dubose. Jen told him what happened. "Did she frighten you?" asked Atticus. "No, sir," said Jen, "but she's so nasty. She has fits or something. She spits a lot. She can't help that. When people are sick, they don't look nice sometimes. She scared me," I said. Atticus looked at me over his glasses. "You don't have to go with Jen, no." The next afternoon at Mrs. Dubose's was the same as the first, and so was the next, until gradually a pattern emerged. Everything would begin normally. That is, Mrs. Dubose would hound Jen for a while on her favorite subjects, her camellias, and our father's nigger-loving propensities. She would grow increasingly silent, then go away from us. The alarm clock would ring, Jessie would shoo us out, and the rest of the day was ours. "Atticus," I said one evening, "what exactly is a nigger lover?" Atticus' face was grave. "Has somebody been calling you that?" "No, sir. Mrs. Dubose calls you that. She warms up every afternoon calling you that." "Francis called me that last Christmas. That's where I first heard it." "Is that the reason you jumped on him?" asked Atticus. "Yes, sir." "Then why are you asking me what it means?" I tried to explain to Atticus that it wasn't so much what Francis said that had infuriated me as the way he had said it. It was like he'd said snot-nose or something. "Scout," said Atticus. "Nigger lover is just one of those terms that don't mean anything, like snot-nose. It's hard to explain. Ignorant, trashy people use it when they think somebody's favoring Negroes over and above themselves. It's slipped into usage with some people like ourselves when they want a common ugly term to label somebody. You aren't really a nigger lover then, are you?" "I certainly am. I do my best to love everybody. I'm hard put sometimes. Baby, it's never an insult to be called what somebody thinks is a bad name. It just shows you how poor that person is. It doesn't hurt you. So don't let Mrs. Dubose get you down. She has enough troubles of her own." One afternoon, a month later, Jem was ploughing his way through Sir Walter Scout, as Jem called him, and Mrs. Dubose was correcting him at every turn, when there was a knock on the door. "Come in," she screamed. Atticus came in. He went to the bed and took Mrs. Dubose's hand. "I was coming from the office and didn't see the children," he said. "I thought they might still be here." Mrs. Dubose smiled at him. For the life of me, I could not figure out how she could bring herself to speak to him when she seemed to hate him so. "Do you know what time it is, Atticus?" she said. "Exactly 14 minutes past 5. The alarm clock's set for 5:30. I want you to know that." It suddenly came to me that each day we had been staying a little longer at Miss, that the alarm clock went off a few minutes later every day, and that she was well into one of her fits by the time it sounded. Today she had antagonized Jem for 2 hours with no intention of having a fit, and I felt hopelessly trapped. The alarm clock was the signal for our release. If one day it did not ring, what would we do? "I have a feeling that Jem's reading days are numbered," said Atticus. "Only a week longer, I think," she said, just to make sure. Jem rose. But Atticus put out his hand and Jem was silent. On the way home, Jem said he had to do it just for a month, and the month was up, and it wasn't fair. Just one more week, son, said Atticus. No, said Jem. Yes, said Atticus. The following week found us back at Mrs. Dubos's. The alarm clock had ceased sounding, but Mrs. Dubose would release us with, "That'll do." So late in the afternoon, Atticus would be home reading the paper when we returned. Although her fits had passed off, she was in every other way her old self. When Sir Walter Scott became involved in lengthy descriptions of moats and castles, Mrs. Dubose would become bored and pick on us. "Jeremy Finch, I told you you'd live to regret tearing up my camellias. You regret it now, don't you?" Jem would say he certainly did. "Thought you could kill my snow on the mountain, did you? Well, Jessie says the top's growing back out. Next time you'll know how to do it right, won't you? You'll pull it up by the roots, won't you?" Jem would say he certainly would. "Don't you mutter at me, boy. You hold up your head and say yes, ma'am. Don't guess you feel like holding it up, though, with your father, what he is." Jem's chin would come up, and he would gaze at Mrs. Dubose with a face devoid of resentment. Through the weeks he had cultivated an expression of polite and detached interest, which he would present to her in answer to her most blood-curdling inventions. At last the day came, when Mrs. Dubose said, "That'll do." One afternoon, she added, "And that's all. Good day to you." It was over. We bounded down the sidewalk on a spree of sheer relief, leaping and howling. That spring was a good one. The days grew longer and gave us more playing time. Jem's mind was occupied mostly with the vital statistics of every college football player in the nation. Every night Atticus would read us the sports pages of the newspapers. Alabama might go to the Rose Bowl again this year, judging from its prospects, not one of whose names we could pronounce. Atticus was in the middle of Windy Seaton's column one evening when the telephone rang. He answered it, then went to the hat rack in the hall. "I'm going down to Mrs. Dubose's for a while," he said. "I won't be long." But Atticus stayed away until long past my bedtime. When he returned, he was carrying a candy box. Atticus sat down in the living room and put the box on the floor beside his chair. "What did she want?" asked Jem. We had not seen Mrs. Dubose for over a month. She was never on the porch anymore when we passed. "She's dead, son," said Atticus. "She died a few minutes ago." "Oh," said Jem. Well is right," said Atticus. "She's not suffering anymore. She was sick for a long time. Son, didn't you know what her fits were?" Jem shook his head. "Mrs. Dubose was a morphine addict," said Atticus. "She took it as a painkiller for years. The doctor put her on it.
I gotta go. What's going on? Can I go through?
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
She'd have spent the rest of her life on it and died without so much agony. But she was too contrary. Sir, said Jem. Atticus said, just before your escapade, she called me to make her will.
Madison, thank you for following. ETA is 19 minutes. I don't know what the other guy's talking about. The pizza? I don't know what he's talking about. But thank you for following. ETA is 19 minutes.
Reynolds told her she had only a few months left. Her business affairs were in perfect order, but she said, there's still one thing out of order. What was that? Jem was perplexed. She said she was going to leave this world beholden to nothing and nobody. Jem, when you're sick as she was, it's all right to take anything to make it easier. But it wasn't all right for her. She said she meant to break herself of it before she died, and that's what she did. Jem said, you mean that's what her fits were? Yes, that's what they were. Most of the time you were reading to her, I doubt if she heard a word you said. Her whole mind and body were concentrated on that alarm clock. If you hadn't fallen into her hands, I'd have made you go read to her anyway. It may have been some distraction. There was another reason. Did she die free? Asked Jem. As the mountain air, said Atticus. She was conscious to the last, almost. Conscious, he smiled, and cantankerous. She still disapproved heartily of my doings, and said I'd probably spend the rest of my life bailing you out of jail. She had Jesse fix you this box. Atticus reached down and picked up the candy box. He handed it to Jem. Jem opened the box. Inside, surrounded by wads of damp cotton, was a white, waxy, perfect camellia. It was a snow on the mountain. Jem's eyes nearly popped out of his head. Old hell devil! Old hell devil! He screamed, flinging it down. Why can't she leave me alone? In a flash, Atticus was up and standing over him. Jem buried his face in Atticus's shirt front. Shh, he said. I think that was her way of telling you. Everything's all right now, Jem. Everything's all right. You know, she was a great lady. A lady? Jem raised his head. His face was scarlet. After all those things she said about you, a lady? She was. She had her own views about things. A lot different from mine, maybe. Son, I told you that if you hadn't lost your head, I'd have made you go read to her. I wanted you to see something about her. I wanted you to see what real courage is, instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're nicked, before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what. You rarely win, but sometimes you do. Mrs. DeBose won, all 98 pounds of her. According to her views, she died beholden to nothing and nobody. She was the bravest person I ever knew. Jem picked up the candy box and threw it in the fire. He picked up the camellia, and when I went off to bed, I saw him fingering the white petals. Atticus was reading the paper. Part 2. Contents. Prev. Next. Chapter 12. Jem was 12. He was difficult to live with, inconsistent, moody. His appetite was appalling, and he told me so many times to stop pestering him. I consulted Atticus. Reckon he's got a tapeworm? Atticus said no. Jem was growing. I must be patient with him and disturb him as little as possible. This change in Jem had come about in a matter of weeks. Mrs. DuBose was not cold in her grave. Jem had seemed grateful enough for my company when he went to read to her. Overnight, it seemed, Jem had acquired an alien set of values and was trying to impose them on me. Several times he went so far as to tell me what to do. After one altercation when Jem hollered, "It's time you started being a girl and acting right," I burst into tears and fled to Calpurnia. "Don't you fret too much over Mr. Jem," she began. "Mr. Jem? Yeah, he's just about Mr. Jem now. He ain't that old," I said. "All he needs is somebody to beat him up, and I ain't big enough." "Baby," said Calpurnia, "I just can't help it if Mr. Jem's growing up. He's gonna want to be off to himself a lot now, doing whatever boys do, so you just come right on in the kitchen when you feel lonesome. We'll find lots of things to do in here." The beginning of that summer boded well. Jem could do as he pleased. Calpurnia would do until Dill came. She seemed glad to see me when I appeared in the kitchen, and by watching her, I began to think there was some skill involved in being a girl. But summer came, and Dill was not there. I received a letter and a snapshot from him. The letter said he had a new father whose picture was enclosed, and he would have to stay in Meridian because they planned to build a fishing boat. His father was a lawyer, like Atticus, only much younger. Dill's new father had a pleasant face, which made me glad Dill had captured him, but I was crushed. Dill concluded by saying he would love me forever, and not to worry, he would come get me and marry me as soon as he got enough money together. Please write. The fact that I had a permanent fiancée was little compensation for his absence. I had never thought of it, but summer was Dill by the fishpool smoking string. Dill's eyes alive with complicated plans. He kissed me, and Jem was looking, longings we sometimes. With him, life was routine. Without him, life was unbearable. I stayed miserable for 2 days. As if that were not enough, the state legislature was called into emergency session, and Atticus left us for 2 weeks. The governor was eager to scrape a few barnacles off the ship of state. There were sit-down strikes in Birmingham. Bread lines in the cities grew longer. People in the country grew poorer. But these were events remote from the world of Jem and me. We were surprised one morning to see a cartoon in the Montgomery Advertiser above the caption, "Maycomb's Finch." It showed Atticus barefooted and in chance, chained to a desk. He was diligently writing on a slate, while some frivolous-looking girls yelled, "You-hoo!" at him. "That's a compliment," explained Jem. "He spends his time doing things that wouldn't get done if nobody did them." Huh? In addition to Jem's newly developed characteristics, he had acquired a maddening air of wisdom. "Oh, Scout, it's like reorganizing the tax systems of the counties and things. That kind of thing's pretty dry to most men." "How do you know?" "Oh, go on and leave me alone. I'm reading the paper." Jem got his wish. I departed for the kitchen. While she was shelling peas, Calpurnia suddenly said, "What am I going to do about you all's church this Sunday?" "Nothing, I reckon." Atticus left us collection. Calpurnia's eyes narrowed, and I could tell what was going through her mind. "Cal," I said, "you know we'll behave. We haven't done anything in church in years." Calpurnia evidently remembered a rainy Sunday when we were both fatherless and teacherless. Left to its own devices, the class tied Eunice Ann Simpson to a chair and placed her in the furnace room. We forgot her, trooped upstairs to church, and were listening quietly to the sermon when a dreadful banging issued from the radiator pipes, persisting until someone investigated and brought forth Eunice Ann saying she didn't want to play Shadrach anymore. Jem Finch said she wouldn't get burned if she had enough faith, but it was hot down there. "Besides, Cal, this isn't the first time Atticus has left us," I protested. Yeah, but he makes certain your teacher's gonna be there. I didn't hear him say this time. Reckon he forgot it. Calpurnia scratched her head. Suddenly she smiled. How do you and Mr. Jem like to come to church with me tomorrow? Really? How about it? Grinned Calpurnia. If Calpurnia had ever bathed me roughly before, it was nothing compared to her supervision of that Saturday night's routine. She made me soap all over twice, drew fresh water in the tub for each rinse. She stuck my head in the basin and washed it with Octagon soap and Castile. She had trusted Jem for years, but that night she invaded his privacy and provoked an outburst. Can't anybody take a bath in this house without the whole family looking? Next morning she began earlier than usual to go over our clothes. When Calpurnia stayed overnight with us, she sold in cot in the kitchen. That morning it was covered with our Sunday habiliments. She had put so much starch in my dress it came up like a tent when I sat down. She made me wear a petticoat and she wrapped a pink sash tightly around my waist. She went over my patent leather shoes with a cold biscuit until she saw her face in them. It's like we were going to Mardi Gras, said Jem. What's all this for, Cal? I don't want to say and I don't look after my children, she muttered. Mr. Jem, you absolutely can't wear that tie with that suit. It's green. Smatter with that? Suit's blue, can't you tell? Hee hee, I howled. Jem's color blind. His face flushed angrily. But Calpurnia said, now you all quit that. You're gonna go to First Purchase with smiles on your faces. First Purchase. African ME Church was in the quarters outside the southern town limits, across the old sawmill tracks. It was an ancient paint-peeled frame building, the only church in Maycomb with a steeple and bell, called First Purchase, because it was paid for from the first earnings of freed slaves. Negroes worshipped in it on Sundays, and white men gambled in it on weekdays. The churchyard was brick-hard clay, as was the cemetery beside it. If someone died during a dry spell, the body was covered with chunks of ice until rain softened the earth. A few graves in the cemetery were marked with crumbling tombstones. Newer ones were outlined with brightly colored glass and broken Coca-Cola bottles. Lightning rods guarding some graves denoted dead who rested uneasily. Stumps of burned-out candles stood at the heads of infant graves. It was a happy cemetery. The warm, bittersweet smell of clean Negro welcomed us as we entered the churchyard. Hearts of love, hairdressing mingled with asafoetida, snuff, Hoyt's cologne, Brown's mule, peppermint, and lilac talcum. When they saw Jem and me with Calpurnia, the men stepped back and took off their hats. The women crossed their arms at their waists, weekday gestures of respectful attention. They parted and made a small pathway to the church door for us. Calpurnia walked between Jem and me, responding to the greetings of her brightly clad neighbors. "What you up to, Miss Cal?" said a voice behind us. Calpurnia's hands went to our shoulders, and we stopped and looked around. Standing in the path behind us was a tall Negro woman. Her weight was on one leg. She rested her left elbow in the curve of her hip, pointing at us with upturned palm. She was bullet-headed with strange almond-shaped eyes, straight nose, and an Indian bow mouth. She seemed 7 feet high. I felt Calpurnia's hand dig into my shoulder. "What you want, Lula?" she asked in tones I had never heard her use. She spoke quietly, contemptuously. "I wants to know why you bring in white chillun to nigger church." "They's my company," said Calpurnia. Again, I thought her voice strange. She was talking like the rest of them. "Yeah, and I reckon you's company at the Finch house during the week." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Don't you fret," Calpurnia whispered to me, but the roses on her hat trembled indignantly. When Lula came up the pathway toward us, Calpurnia said, "Stop right there, nigger." Lula stopped, but she said, "You ain't got no business bringing white chillun here. They got their church, we got our'n. It is our church, ain't it, Miss Cal?" Calpurnia said, "It's the same God, ain't it?" Jem said, "Let's go home, Cal. They don't want us here." I agreed. They did not want us here. I sensed, rather than saw, that we were being advanced upon. They seemed to be drawing closer to us. But when I looked up at Calpurnia, there was amusement in her eyes. When I looked down the pathway again, Lula was gone. In her place was a solid mass of colored people. One of them stepped from the crowd. It was Zebo, the garbage collector. "Mr. Jem," he said, "we're mighty glad to have you all here. Don't pay no attention to Lula. She's contentious because Reverend Sykes threatened to church her. She's a troublemaker from way back, got fancy ideas and haughty ways. We're mighty glad to have you all." With that, Calpurnia led us to the church door, where we were greeted by Reverend Sykes, who led us to the front pew. First Purchase was unsealed and unpainted within. Along its walls, unlighted kerosene lamps hung on brass brackets. Pine benches served as pews. Behind the rough oak pulpit, a faded pink silk banner proclaimed, "God is love," the church's only decoration except a rotogravure print of Hans, the light of the world. There was no sign of piano, organ, hymn books, church programs, the familiar ecclesiastical impedimenta we saw every Sunday. It was dim inside, with a damp coolness slowly dispelled by the gathering congregation. At each seat was a cheap cardboard fan, bearing a garish Garden of Gethsemane, courtesy Tyndall's Hardware Co. You name it, we sell it. Calpurnia motioned Jem and me to the end of the row, and placed herself between us. She fished in her purse, drew out a handkerchief, and untied the hard wad of change in its corner. She gave a dime to me, and a dime to Jem. "We've got ours," he whispered. "You keep it," Calpurnia said. "You're my company." Jem's face showed brief indecision on the ethics of withholding his own dime, but his innate courtesy won, and he shifted his dime to his pocket. I did likewise with no qualms. "Cal," I whispered, "where are the hymn books?" "We don't have any," she said. "Well, how?" "Shh," she said. Reverend Sykes was standing behind the pulpit, staring the congregation to silence. He was a short, stocky man in a black suit, black tie, white shirt, and a gold watch chain that glinted in the light from the frosted windows. He said, "Brethren and sisters, we are particularly glad to have company with us this morning. Mr. and Miss Finch. You all know their father. Before I begin, I will read some announcements." Reverend Sykes shuffled some papers, chose one, and held it at arm's length. "The Missionary Society meets in the home of Sister Annette Reeves next Tuesday. Bring your sewing." He read from another paper. "You all know of Brother Tom Robinson's trouble. He has been a faithful member of First Purchase since he was a boy. The collection taken up today, and for the next 3 Sundays will go to Helen, his wife, to help her out at home." I punched Jem. "That's the Tom Atticus's dip." "Shh." I turned to Calpurnia, but was hushed before I opened my mouth. Subdued, I fixed my attention upon Reverend Sykes, who seemed to be waiting for me to settle down. "Will the music superintendent lead us in the first hymn?" he said. Zebo rose from his pew and walked down the center aisle, stopping in front of us and facing the congregation. He was carrying a battered hymn book. He opened it and said, "We'll sing number 273. This was too much for me. "How are we gonna sing it if there ain't any hymn books?" Calpurnia smiled. "Hush, baby," she whispered. "You'll see in a minute." Zebo cleared his throat and read at the voice the rumble of distant artillery. "There's a land beyond the river." Miraculously on pitch, 100 voices sang out Zebo's words. The last syllable, held to a husky hum, was followed by Zebo saying, "That we call the sweet forever." Music again swelled around us. The last note lingered, and Zebo met it with the next line. "And we only reach that shore by faith's decree." The congregation hesitated. Zebo repeated the line carefully, and it was sung. At the chorus, Zebo closed the book, a signal for the congregation to proceed without his help. On the dying notes of Jubilee, Zebo said, "In that far-off sweet forever, just beyond the shining river." Line for line. Voices followed in simple harmony until the hymn ended in a melancholy murmur. I looked at Jem, who was looking at Zebo from the corners of his eyes. I didn't believe it either, but we had both heard it. Reverend Sykes then called on the Lord to bless the sick and the suffering.
Madison, thank you for the tip. I really appreciate you. It really helps. And I don't know if you're still here or not, but if you are, this is a true crime podcast out of Prince William County. We're tracking and following a case that's been ongoing for 4 years. They've had this guy in a county jail for 4 years without a trial. Please follow the channel. Please share it with all your friends and watch the podcast that I did 2 days ago. We got our hand on the whole file, and it shows the reason the county is not taking this guy to trial is because they falsified the case.
A procedure no different from our church practice, except Reverend Sykes directed the deity's attention to several specific cases. His sermon was a forthright denunciation of sin, an austere declaration of the motto on the wall behind him. He warned his flock against the evils of heady brews, gambling, and strange women. Bootleggers caused enough trouble in the quarters, but women were worse. Again, as I had often met it in my own church, I was confronted with the impurity of women doctrine that seemed to preoccupy all clergymen. Jem and I had heard the same sermon Sunday after Sunday, with only one exception. Reverend Sykes used his pulpit more freely to express his views on individual lapses from grace. Jim Hardy had been absent from church for 5 Sundays, and he wasn't sick. Constance Jackson had better watch her ways. She was in grave danger for quarreling with her neighbors. She had erected the only spite fence in the history of the quarters. Reverend Sykes closed his sermon. He stood beside a table in front of the pulpit and requested the morning offering, a proceeding that was strange to Jem and me. One by one, the congregation came forward and dropped nickels and dimes into a black enameled coffee can. Jem and I followed suit and received a soft thank you, as our dimes clinked. To our amazement, Reverend Sykes emptied the can onto the table and raked the coins into his hand. He straightened up and said, "This is not enough. We must have $10. The congregation stirred. "You all know what it's for. Helen can't leave those children to work while Tom's in jail. If everybody gives one more dime, we'll have it." Reverend Sykes waved his hand and called to someone in the back of the church. "Alec, shut the doors. Nobody leaves here till we have $10. Calpurnia scratched in her handbag and brought forth a battered leather coin purse. "Now, Cal," Jem whispered when she handed him a shiny quarter. "We can put ours in. Give me your dime, Scout." The church was becoming stuffy, and it occurred to me that Reverend Sykes intended to sweat the amount due out of his flock. Fans crackled, feet shuffled, tobacco chewers were in agony. Reverend Sykes startled me by saying sternly, "Carla Richardson, I haven't seen you up this aisle yet." A thin man in khaki pants came up the aisle and deposited a coin. The congregation murmured approval. Reverend Sykes then said, "I want all of you with no children to make a sacrifice and give one more dime apiece. Then we'll have it." Slowly, painfully, the $10 was collected. The door was opened, and the gust of warm air revived us. Zeba lined on Jordan's stormy banks, and church was over. I wanted to stay and explore, but Calpurnia propelled me up the aisle ahead of her. At the church door, while she paused to talk with Zebo and his family, Jem and I did with Reverend Sykes. I was bursting with questions, but decided I would wait and let Calpurnia answer them. "We were especially glad to have you all here," said Reverend Sykes. "This church has no better friend than your daddy." My curiosity burst. "Why were you all taking up collection for Tom Robinson's wife?" "Didn't you hear why?" asked Reverend Sykes. "Helen's got 3 little uns and she can't go out to work." "Why can't she take 'em with her, Reverend?" I asked. It was customary for field Negroes with tiny children to deposit them in whatever shade their parents worked. Usually the babies sat in the shade between 2 rows of cotton. Those unable to sit were strapped papoose style on their mothers' backs, or resided in extra cotton bags. Reverend Sykes hesitated. "To tell you the truth, Miss John Louise, Helen's finding it hard to get work these days. When it's picking time, I think Mr. Link Deese will take her." "Why not, Reverend?" Before he could answer, I felt Calpurnia's hand on my shoulder. At its pressure, I said, "We thank you for letting us come." Jem echoed me, and we made our way homeward. "Cal, I know Tom Robinson's in jail and he's done something awful, but why won't folks hire Helen?" I asked. Calpurnia, in her navy voile dress and tub of a hat, walked between Jem and me. "It's because of what folks say Tom's done," she said. "Folks aren't anxious to have anything to do with any of his family." "Just what did he do, Cal?" Calpurnia sighed. "Old Mr. Bob Ewell accused him of raping his girl and had him arrested and put in jail." "Mr. Ewell?" My memory stirred. "Does he have anything to do with those Ewells that come every first day of school and then go home? Why, Atticus said they were absolute trash. I never heard Atticus talk about folks the way he talked about the Ewells. He said, 'Yeah, those are the ones.' Well, if everybody in Maycomb knows what kind of folks the Ewells are, they'd be glad to hire Helen." "What's rape, Cal?" "It's something you'll have to ask Mr. Finch about," she said. "He can explain it better than I can. You all hungry?" The Reverend took a long time unwinding this morning. He's not usually so tedious. "He's just like our preacher," said Jem. "But why do you all sing hymns that way?" "Linen?" she asked. "Is that what it is?" "Yeah, it's called linen. They've done it that way as long as I can remember." Jem said it looked like they could save the collection money for a year and get some hymn books. Calpurnia laughed. "Wouldn't do any good," she said. "They can't read." "Can't read?" I asked. "All those folks?" "That's right," Calpurnia nodded. "Can't but about 4 folks in First Purchase read. I'm one of them." "Where'd you go to school, Cal?" asked Jem. "Nowhere. Let's see now. Who taught me my letters? It was Miss Maudie Atkinson's aunt, old Miss Buford." "Are you that old?" "I'm older than Mr. Finch, even." Calpurnia grinned. "Not sure how much, though. We started remembering one time, trying to figure out how old I was. I can remember back just a few years more and he can, so I'm not much older, when you take off the fact that men can't remember as well as women." "What's your birthday, Cal?" "I just have it on Christmas. It's easier to remember that way. I don't have a real birthday." "But Cal," Jem protested, "you don't look even near as old as Atticus." "Colored folks don't show their ages so fast," she said. "Maybe because they can't read." "Cal, did you teach Zebo?" "Yeah, Mr. Jem. There wasn't a school even when he was a boy. I made him learn, though." Zebo was Calpurnia's eldest son. If I had ever thought about it, I would have known that Calpurnia was of mature years. Zebo had half-grown children, but then I had never thought about it. Did you teach him out of a primer like us? I asked. No, I made him get a page of the Bible every day, and there was a book Miss Buford taught me out of. Bet you don't know where I got it, she said. We didn't know. Calpurnia said, your granddaddy Finch gave it to me. Were you from the landing? Jem asked. You never told us that. I certainly am, Mr. Jem. Grew up down there between the Buford place and the landing. I've spent all my days working for the Finches of the Bufords, and I moved to Maycomb when your daddy and your mama married. What was the book, Cal? I asked. Blackstone's Commentaries. Jem was thunderstruck. You mean you taught Zebo out of that? Why, yes, sir, Mr. Jem. Calpurnia timidly put her fingers to her mouth. They were the only books I had. Your grandmother said Mr. Blackstone wrote fine English. That's why you don't talk like the rest of them, said Jem. The rest of who? The rest of the colored folks. Cal. But you talked like they did in church. That Calpurnia led a modest, dull life never dawned on me. The idea that she had a separate existence outside our household was a novel one, to say nothing of her having command of 2 languages. Cal, I asked, why do you talk nigger talk to your folks when you know it's not right? Well, in the first place, I'm black. That doesn't mean you have to talk better, said Jem. Calpurnia tilted her hat and scratched her head, then pressed her hat down carefully over her ears. It's right hard to say, she said. Suppose you and Scout talked colored folks talk at home, it'd be out of place, wouldn't it? Now what if I talked white folks talk at church and with my neighbors? They'd think I was putting on airs to beat Moses. But Cal, you know better, I said. It's not necessary to tell all you know. It's not ladylike. In the second place, folks don't like to have somebody around knowing more than they do. It aggravates them. You're not going to change any of them by talking right. They've got to want to learn themselves. And when they don't want to learn, there's nothing you can do but keep your mouth shut or talk which. Cal, can I come to see you sometimes? She looked down at me. See me, honey? Every day. Out to your house, I said. Sometimes after work. Atticus can get me. Anytime you want to, she said. We were on the sidewalk of Lee Place. Look on the porch yonder, Jem said. I looked over to the Redley place, expecting to see its phantom occupant sunning himself in the swing. The sweaty. I mean our porch, said Jem. I looked down the street. Enarmored, upright, uncompromising, Aunt Alexandra was sitting in a rocking chair, exactly as if she had sat there every day of her life. Contents. Prev. Next. Chapter 13. Put my bag in the front bedroom, Calpurnia, was the first thing Aunt Alexandra said. Jean-Louise, stop scratching your head, was the second thing she said. Calpurnia picked up Auntie's heavy suitcase and opened the door. I'll take it, said Jem, and took it. I heard the suitcase hit the bedroom floor with a thump. The sound had a dull permanence. Have you come for a visit, Auntie? I asked. Aunt Alexandra's visits from the land were rare, and she traveled in state. She owned a bright green square Buick and a black. But today they were to be seen. Didn't your father tell you? She asked. Jem and I shook our heads. Probably he forgot. He's not in yet, is he? No, he doesn't usually get back till late afternoon, said Jem. Well, your father and I decided it was time I came to stay with you for a while. For a while, in Maycomb, meant anything from 3 days to 30 years. Jem and I exchanged glances. Jem's growing up now, and you are too, she said to me. We decided that it would be best for you to have some feminine influence. It won't be many years, Jean-Louise, before you become interested in clothes and boys. I could have made several answers to this. Cal's a girl. It would be many years before I would be interested in boys. I would never be interested in clothes. But I kept quiet. What about Uncle Jimmy? Asked Jem. Is he coming too? Oh no, he's staying at the landing. He'll keep the place going. The moment I said, won't you miss him? I realized that this was not a tactful question. Uncle Jimmy present or Uncle Jimmy absent made not much difference. He never said anything. Aunt Alexandra ignored my question. I could think of nothing else to say to her. In fact, I could never think of anything to say to her, and I sat thinking of past painful conversations between us. How are you, Jean-Louise? Fine. Thank you, ma'am. How are you? Very well, thank you. What have you been doing with yourself? Nothing. Don't you do anything? No? Certainly you have friends? Yes, sir. Well, what do you all do? Nothing. It was plain that Auntie thought me dull in the extreme, because I once heard her tell Atticus that I was sluggish. There was a story behind all this, but I had no desire to extract it from her. Today was Sunday, and Aunt Alexandra was positively irritable on the Lord's Day. I guess it was her Sunday corset. She was not fat, but solid, and she chose protective garments that drew up her bosom to giddy heights, pinched in her waist, flared out her rear, and managed to suggest that Aunt Alexandra's was once an hourglass figure. From any angle, it was formidable. The remainder of the afternoon went by in the gentle gloom that descends when relatives appear, but was dispelled when we heard a car turn in the driveway. It was Atticus, home from Montgomery. Jem, forgetting his dignity, ran with me to meet him. Jem seized his briefcase and bag. I jumped into his arms, felt his vague dry kiss, and said, "Did you bring me a book? Do you know Auntie's here?" Atticus answered both questions in the affirmative. How'd you like for her to come live with us? I said I would like it very much, which was a lie, but one must lie under certain circumstances, and at all times when one can't do anything about them. We felt it was time you children needed. Well, it's like this, Scout, Atticus said. Your aunt's doing me a favor as well as you all. I can't stay here all day with you, and the summer's going to be a hot one. Yes, sir, I said, not understanding a word he said. I had an idea, however, that Aunt Alexandra's appearance on the scene was not so much Atticus's doing as hers. Auntie had a way of declaring what is best for the family, and I suppose her coming to live with us was in that category. Maycomb welcomed her. Miss Maudie Atkinson baked a lane cake so loaded with shinny it made me tight. Miss Stephanie Crawford had long visits with Aunt Alexandra, consisting mostly of Miss Stephanie shaking her head and saying, Miss Rachel next door had Auntie over for coffee in the afternoons, and Mr. Nathan Radley went so far as to come up in the front yard and say he was glad to see her. When she settled in with us, and life resumed its daily pace, Aunt Alexandra seemed as if she had always lived with us. Her missionary society refreshments added to her reputation as a hostess. She did not permit Calpurnia to make the delicacies required to sustain the society through long reports on Rice Christians. She joined and became secretary of the Maycomb Amanuensis Club. To all parties present and participating in the life of the county, Aunt Alexandra was one of the last of her kind. She had riverboat, boarding school manners. Let any moral come along and she would uphold it. She was born in the objective case. She was an incurable gossip. When Aunt Alexandra went to school, self-doubt could not be found in any textbook, so she knew not its meaning. She was never bored, and given the slightest chance she would exercise her royal prerogative. She would arrange, advise, caution, and warn. She never let a chance escape her to point out the shortcomings of other tribal groups to the greater glory of our own, a habit that amused Jem rather than annoyed him. Auntie better watch how she talks. Scratch most folks in Maycomb, and they're kin to us. Aunt Alexandra, in underlining the moral of young Sam Merriweather's suicide, said it was caused by a morbid streak in the family. Let a 16-year-old girl drill in the choir, and Auntie will say, It just goes to show you, all the field women are flighty. Everybody in Maycomb, it seemed, had a streak, a drinking streak, a gambling streak, a mean streak, a funny streak. Once, when Auntie assured us that Miss Stephanie Crawford's tendency to mind other people's business was hereditary, Atticus said, "Sister, when you stop to think about it, our generation's practically the first in the Finch family not to marry its cousins. Would you say the Finches have an incestuous streak?" Auntie said no. That's where we got our small hands and feet. I never understood her preoccupation with heredity. Somewhere I had received the impression that fine folks were people who did the best they could with the sense they had, but Aunt Alexandra was of the opinion, obliquely expressed, that the longer a family had been squatting on one patch of land, the finer it was. "That makes the Yules fine folks then," said Jem. The tribe of which Burris Yule and his brethren consisted had lived on the same plot of earth behind Maycomb Dump, and had thrived on county welfare money for 3 generations. Aunt Alexandra's theory had something behind it, though. Maycomb was an ancient town. It was 20 miles east of Finch's Landing, awkwardly inland for such an old town. But Maycomb would have been closer to the river had it not been for the nimble-wittedness of one Sinkfield, who in the dawn of history operated an inn where 2 pig trails met, the only tavern in the territory. Sinkfield, no patriot, served and supplied ammunition to Indians and settlers alike, neither knowing or caring whether he was a part of the Alabama Territory or the Creek Nation, so long as business was good. Business was excellent, and Governor William Wyatt Bibb, with a view to promoting the newly created county's domestic tranquility, dispatched a team of surveyors to locate its exact center and there establish its seat of government. The surveyors, Sinkfield's guests, told their host that he was in the territorial confines of Maycomb County, and showed him the probable spot where the county seat would be built. Had not Sinkfield made a bold stroke to preserve his holdings, Maycomb would have sat in the middle of Winston Swamp, a place totally devoid of interest. Instead, Maycomb grew and sprawled out from its hub, Sinkfield's Tavern, because Sinkfield reduced his guests to myopic drunkenness one evening, induced them to bring forward their maps and charts, lop off a little here, add a bit there, and adjust the center of the county to meet his requirements. He sent them packing next day, armed with their charts and 5 quarts of shinny in their saddlebags, 2 apiece, and 1 for the governor. Because its primary reason for existence was government, Maycomb was spared the grubbiness that distinguished most Alabama towns its size. In the beginning, its buildings were solid, its courthouse proud, its streets graciously wide. Maycomb's proportion of professional people ran high. One went there to have his teeth pulled, his wagon fixed, his heart listened to, his money deposited, his soul saved, his mules vetted. But the ultimate wisdom of Sinkfield's maneuver is open to question. He placed the young town too far away from the only kind of public transportation in those days, riverboat, and it took a man from the north end of the county 2 days to travel to Maycomb for store-bought goods. As a result, the town remained the same size for 100 years, an island in a patchwork sea of cotton fields and timberland. Although Maycomb was ignored during the war between the states, Reconstruction rule and economic ruin forced the town to grow. It grew inward. New people so rarely settled there. The same families married the same families, until the members of the community looked faintly alike. Occasionally someone would return from Montgomery or Mobile with an outsider, but the result caused only a ripple in the quiet stream of family resemblance. Things were more or less the same during my early years. There was indeed a caste system in Maycomb, but to my mind it worked this way. The older citizens, the present generation of people who had lived side by side for years and years, were utterly predictable to one another. They took for granted attitudes, character shadings, even gestures, as having been repeated in each generation and defined by time. Thus the dicta, no Crawford minds, his own business, every third. Merryweather is morbid, the truth is not in the Delafields, all the Bufords. Walk like that were simply guides to daily living. never take a check from a Delafield without a discreet call to the bank. Miss Maudie Atkinson's shoulder stoops because she was a Buford. If Mrs. Grace Merriweather sips gin out of Lydia E. Pinkham bottles, it's nothing unusual. Her mother did the same. Aunt Alexandra fitted into the world of Maycomb like a hand into a glove, but never into the world of Jem and me. I so often wondered how she could be Atticus's and Uncle Jack's sister, that I revived half-remembered tales of changelings and mandrake roots that Jem had spun long ago. These were abstract speculations for the first month of her stay, as she had little to say to Jem or me, and we saw her only at mealtimes and at night before we went to bed. It was summer, and we were outdoors. Of course, some afternoons when I would run inside for a drink of water, I would find the living room overrun with Maycomb ladies, sipping, whispering, fanning, and I would be called, Jean-Louise, come speak to these ladies. When I appeared in the doorway, Auntie would look as if she regretted her request. I was usually mud-splashed or covered with sand. Speak to your cousin Lily, she said one afternoon when she had trapped me in the hall. Who? I said. Your cousin Lily Brooke, said Aunt Alexandra. She your cousin? I didn't know that. Aunt Alexandra managed to smile in a way that conveyed a gentle apology to Cousin Lily and firm disapproval to me. When Cousin Lily Brooke left, I knew I was in for it. It was a sad thing that my father had neglected to tell me about the Finch family, or to install any pride into his children. She summoned Jem, who
All right. Then what we're gonna do, we're gonna call it a night. It's been a long day. Yeah? Yeah. Tired, I'm exhausted. I want to go home and go to sleep. That's exactly what I'm gonna do. That's exactly what I'm gonna do. All right. I love everybody. Thank you for being here. Make sure you follow the channel. Watch the podcast we did a couple of days ago. This is a true crime podcast out of Prince William County, and we're following the case of Mustafa Al-Jazari. It's an ongoing case. They've had him in a county jail for 4 years, and the county refused to take him to trial. And the question is, the county says he's guilty. Well, why not give him his day in trial? Why not give him his day in court? Well, fast forward to me getting my hand on the whole file, it shows that the reason they're not taking him to court, they're not giving him his day in court, is because they falsified the whole case. So, follow the channel, watch the podcast, leave me questions. I love everybody. Thank you for being here. And I will see everybody tomorrow. I love everybody. Peace out.